Coming up on Talking Points, the Democratic primary ballot takes shape for Syracuse's next mayor. 3 candidates remain to challenge for Ben Walsh's seat.
Plus, Putin declares a brief Easter ceasefire deal on the war in Ukraine, but air raids wage on.
And the Trump administration continues to target universities for its DEI policies. How schools are reacting. All that and more. Talking Points starts right now. Good evening and welcome into Talking Points. Well, the next time we're on airwaves, the Syracuse mayoral race will be in the thick of action. Hello, everyone. My name is Andrea-Rose Oates.
And I'm Ben Bascuk. While there are still several months before the race, our Alex Burstein joins us to break down what's happening now and what to look for in the coming weeks. Alex?
Yeah, guys, it's everyone's favorite time of year, election season. Okay, maybe not yet, but the race to replace Ben Walsh, the 2-time incumbent, is really picking up in these past couple of weeks. And we already know 2 people who are probably going to be on that final ballot. You have the Republican in Thomas Babylon, as well as one independent, Tim Rudd, who's trying to get about 1,200 signatures to make it on as a independent. But where things get really interesting is with the Democratic primary. And there's going to be 3 main challengers, Sharon Owens, Pat Hogan, and Chol Majoke. Now, if that seems like a few less than you've been used to, it's because just as of last week, it was 5. There was also Afonso Davis and Jimmy Oliver in the picture. However, the one problem happened, and it was because of Sharon Owens. You need 1,000 signatures to make it onto the ballot, and it seemed like all 5 of the candidates did. However, people in Owens' campaign saw some inconsistencies with 2 of the candidates' petitions. Those got thrown out, and eventually those 2 ended up getting taken off the ballot, leaving just 3 people. It's not necessarily the last you'll see of them, as there is a way for them to appeal. Due today, we haven't heard if either of them have yet, but that's a possibility. Also, there's always the independent route. Petitions for those are due near the end of May. So both of those 2 could come back in November. But for now, just 3 to focus on. We'll break those down quickly for you here. The front runner right now is the current deputy mayor, Sharon Owens, and she's been very vocal, was the first person to apply into this race, and she's really big on housing. Started off this past week with a thriving neighborhoods plan, trying to increase the amount of affordable housing and just general housing in the Syracuse area. That's the main point she's going to be on for these next couple of months. Her main challenger, Pat Hogan, who would be the oldest mayor in Syracuse history, a current common councilor who's been in the political scene for a long time here in Syracuse. We mentioned he's the oldest candidate, but with that comes experience, and with that comes endorsements. The Onondaga County Democratic Committee, as well as some top city officials, already endorsing him. And finally, there's Pat Majoke, who was the first refugee to ever win elected office in Syracuse. He's gotten some big waves already. This would be his biggest, though, the current common councilor entering his name into the race. So definitely some people to look out for as we ready for that June 24th primary. We unfortunately will not have shows then, but it's definitely getting closer, and those are the 3 main candidates to watch for the Democrats.
Sure, Alex. Welcome to the desk. Well, you talk about kind of the front runners in this situation, mentioned Sharon Owens, but when we saw this kind of shakeup with endorsements and who made the ballot for what party, that wasn't the case. Sharon Owens wasn't there. Can you kind of walk us through who are the 3 candidates on this ballot and what happened with the parties?
Yeah, it got a little interesting when these endorsements came out, because Owens has had the biggest fundraising. He was the first, as we mentioned, to get into the race, and she's overall just been really the front runner from when this race started just a couple of months ago. We should mention she is the deputy mayor. She has the support maybe of Ben Walsh. He hasn't given any official endorsements yet, but that's obviously the expectation. However, a lot of top city officials, and notably a lot of top black city officials, have been endorsing Pat Hogan. This is confusing because he's the only white candidate in the race for Democrats right now, and at a time where this is the diversest field in Syracuse history, some interesting changes there for the Democrats.
And Alex, you also mentioned that the primary is coming up this June. What are some of the biggest talking points going into this primary election?
Yeah, we said with Owens especially, it's housing, and that's an issue that Syracuse has faced for a long time, just not having enough housing and not having enough affordable housing. All the candidates have talked about that, but another interesting one is public safety, and that's been especially in the conversation the last 5 or 6 years. These are obviously all 3 people experienced with Syracuse. They know how safety is and the struggles they have, but it's especially been Hogan calling for actually more police in the area to try to stop some of this public safety issues.
Yeah, Alex, you talk about kind of the players here, Ben Walsh being one of them, serving as the current mayor. I had the chance to ask Sharon Owens back when she started her campaign, saying, hey, do you have the full-fledged support of the current mayor being the deputy mayor? She said yes, but there's been no official statement. You're saying as of now. Kind of what role does she play as deputy mayor in this? I mean, why doesn't she have the backing that a lot of people think that she might if she has the funds?
And that's the million-dollar question right now, because it assumed you would get the endorsement of the mayor. That hasn't officially happened. Obviously, there's some conversations that have been going on, but that has not officially been said yet. Also, some top city officials, Rashida Caldwell, who is one of the top city councilors, who is black, as we mentioned, has saying that this isn't policy politics. This is just making sure you have the best person. She said in her endorsement, this isn't about identity politics. It's about who can get the job done. So obviously, that's really important. And she's just not getting the support that was initially thought of. There's obviously still a lot of time, a lot of big endorsements to come out. But as of now, not exactly the position that she thought she would be in coming into this April-May period.
Yeah, thanks so much, Alex. Definitely looking forward to seeing how those races turn out. Well, now to the latest on the signal leak from last month. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth sent details on a military strike against Yemen in March to his wife and brother. The signal chat included 13 people and had been named Defense Team Huddle. Hegseth's wife is a former Fox News producer, and his brother is an employee at the Pentagon. The leak of the second group chat is bringing new demands for Hegseth's removal from office.
U.S. stocks dropped today after President Trump pressured and threw insults against the chair of the Federal Reserve, Jerome Powell. Trump is demanding Powell cut interest rates and says the economy is at risk of slowing down. He says Powell is taking too long to make these cuts. Trump's comments drove both the stock market and the value of the dollar lower. This comes after the Trump administration threatened Powell's removal earlier this week.
The Department of Education announced it is starting involuntary repayment of federal student loans that are in default. The payments were paused during President Trump's first term in response to the COVID pandemic. Repayment will be administered by the Department of Treasury, and affected borrowers will receive notices in the next 2 weeks. Involuntary collection will begin May 5th.
When we return, Senator Van Hollen reports on his experience in El Salvador. We'll have new details on the man who was mistakenly deported when we come back on Talking Points.
Rolling.
Sound is speeding.
Can you slow that down, please? This is 28-1.
28-1.
Here you go.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Welcome back into Talking Points. Updates continue regarding Kilmar Abrego Garcia, the Maryland man who was mistakenly deported to a mega prison in El Salvador. Talking Points analyst Megan Acker has the latest. Megan?
Good evening, Andy. More Democrats are traveling to El Salvador today after Senator Chris Van Hollen of Maryland's visit last week. 4 House representatives are arriving in the country hoping to meet with Abrego Garcia now that he has been moved out of CitrusTV into a different unknown facility. Maxine Dexter of Oregon, one of 4, is already taking to social media to express concern. Senator Van Hollen is the last person known to have contacted Garcia and says that he was repeatedly told they would not be able to meet, but that Salvadoran authorities changed their stance last minute. Since then, Van Hollen has made several press appearances detailing his experience.
He said he was later taken with some others from Baltimore to a detention center in Texas. And some point thereafter, I don't know whether it was a period of hours or days, he was handcuffed, shackled, and put on a plane along with some others where they couldn't see out of the windows. There was no way to see where they were going in the plane.
Since the visit, Nayib Bukele, the president of El Salvador, has posted images on X showing the senator and Abrego Garcia conversing over what appear to be cocktails. Van Hollen has claimed that the images were staged. Van Hollen was in El Salvador during the same week as local representative Claudia Tenney, who praised El Salvador after she was allowed to visit CCOT, the same mega prison where Van Hollen was reportedly denied entry. While Abrego Garcia has been transferred to a different facility in El Salvador, over 200 people who were deported from the U.S. are still being held in CCOT, many with no criminal record. The Trump administration appears to be standing firm on its decision to keep Abrego Garcia in El Salvador, despite a unanimous Supreme Court ruling stating the United States must facilitate his return.
Yeah, Megan, since the executive branch typically enforces the laws that are established by the judiciary, what are the consequences for the executive branch itself if the Trump administration fails to bring back Abrego Garcia? And can we kind of expect that the Trump White House, those loyalists, go after the current sitting cabinet?
Yeah, Ben, well, it's kind of hard to say. You know, we learn it in middle school, the 3 branches of government, and the executive, his task is to enforce the law that the Supreme Court doles out. So the fact that they're kind of going rogue here is a little bit unprecedented. So to really kind of understand how they're doing that, I think it's important to take a look at these legal documents that have been rolling out. So the Supreme Court ruled that the administration must facilitate the return of Abrego Garcia. This came after it was taken to the Supreme Court after being decided in a lower court over in Maryland. The lower court ruled that the United States had to facilitate and effectuate the return. So effectuate is sort of the key word here that the Trump administration has zeroed in on, saying the Supreme Court said that it's unclear what the district court could really mean by the term effectuate and said that they can't really rule on foreign policy. So the Trump administration is saying, well, if we're in charge of foreign policy and Abrego Garcia is already in El Salvador, we can't be made to kidnap him out of El Salvador. So that's sort of how they're trying to go around this. But the courts really just aren't having it. So there's some talk right now that Trump could essentially be held in contempt of court.
And Megan, the Department of Homeland Security has released a report claiming Abrego Garcia is a confirmed MS-13 member and has been suspected of human trafficking. So why is it that he has no criminal record thus far?
Well, Andy, that new report has sort of been a huge sticking point for the Trump administration right now. So DHS released this report working with several different law enforcement organizations. It detailed a traffic incident that Garcia was involved in 2022. He was pulled over in the state of Tennessee, and he said he was traveling from Texas to Maryland for work. There were 8 other people in the vehicle with him, and he said that they were all going to a work site and they worked in construction. The individuals in the car had no luggage, so the officer found it suspicious, but there was no police report ever made because reportedly the police officer could not read the handwriting of the other people in the vehicle.
Thanks so much, Megan. We'll definitely keep an eye on that. Well, over the weekend, Russian President Vladimir Putin declared a brief Easter ceasefire in Ukraine. Even though the ceasefire was meant to last 30 hours, Ukraine says Russia continued its attacks.
Here with an update on the war in Ukraine is Talking Points analyst Kraut. Ethan?
Yeah, thanks, Andy. The ceasefire was set to last from 6 p.m. Moscow time on Saturday until midnight on Monday morning. Putin said that he assumed Ukraine would respect the ceasefire and that would help Russia determine if Ukraine is sincere about wanting to end the war. However, within hours of the announcement of the ceasefire, Ukraine claimed that Russia continued to fight during the truce and broke the ceasefire nearly 3,000 times. In an address on Saturday night, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said that his commander-in-chief reported Russian assault operations continuing on some parts of the front lines. Zelensky did say that he hopes Russia would extend this Easter pause to build long-term peace, saying, quote, "This will show Russia's true intentions because 30 hours is enough for headlines, but it is not enough for building measures. 30 days can give peace a chance," end quote. Now, this comes as members of the Trump administration have indicated they're losing patience with peace negotiations. On Friday, Secretary of State Marco Rubio said, quote, "We're not going to continue with this endeavor for weeks and months on end," adding that the U.S. has other priorities to focus on. Later that day, President Trump spoke to reporters about Ukraine from the Oval Office.
If for some reason one of the two parties makes it very difficult, we're just going to say you're foolish, you're fools, you're horrible people, and we're going to just take a pass. But hopefully we won't have to do that.
Throughout the campaign, Trump claimed that he would end the war in his first 24 hours in office by making just one phone call. For now, though, the fighting continues.
Ethan, what is the current situation on the ground for Ukraine?
Russia continues to make slow yet definite advances in the eastern parts of Ukraine. On Friday night, 2 were killed and over 100 others were injured in the northeastern cities of Kharkiv and Sumy after Russian attacks. And on Sunday, during the supposed ceasefire, 3 others were killed in the southern region of Kherson from strikes from Russia. Now, Russia says that now that the ceasefire is over, they'll continue to conduct strikes and military operations on Ukraine. And since the ceasefire has ended, many drone strikes have been taking place by Russia. Guys?
Thanks, Ethan. Well, after the break, higher education continues to fight back against Trump administration policies. How the world's wealthiest university is continuing that fight. Stay with us.
Dad?
Just 1 minute, okay?
Hey, Bobo, do trees tell each other stories?
I'm sorry. I'm afraid I don't know that.
Hey, why don't we go find out? Listen.
Do clouds take naps?
I couldn't tell you.
Can birds draw pictures?
I don't have an answer for that.
Dad, do stars visit their friends?
Look!
Welcome back into Talking Points. The Trump administration has doubled down on its efforts to remove diversity, equity, and inclusion policies from higher education institutions across the country. Here with the latest updates on how these universities are responding is Talking Points analyst Danielle Blynn. Danielle?
Thanks, Andy. Harvard is suing the Trump administration after Trump threatened to freeze over $2 billion in grants and revoke its tax-exempt status. It all started when Harvard received a letter from the administration about their diversity, equity, and inclusion policies, demanding they restructure multiple academic programs.
Because I think Harvard's a disgrace. I think what they did was a disgrace. They're obviously anti-Semitic, and all of a sudden they're starting to behave. But when you see what they were saying, what they were doing, when you see the way they took care of events, when you watch that woman, that horrendous president that ruined the image of Harvard, maybe permanently, in Congress, in the halls of Congress, when you take a look at what happened there.
In response, Harvard says it was planning to ignore the letter that was sent and is now doubling down on its efforts. In a statement from University President Alan Garber, he says, quote, "Today we stand for the values that have made American higher education a beacon for the world. We stand for the truth that colleges and universities across the country can embrace and honor their legal obligations and best fulfill their essential role in society without improper government intrusion." Also fighting against the Trump administration, and in a moment of rare unity between schools that normally fight it out on fields and courts, the Big Ten schools have united together in what they're calling a mutual defense compact. It started with the Faculty Senate at Rutgers University in response to the Trump administration's, quote, "legal, financial, and political attacks." The compact has now been joined by 4 other Big Ten schools, including Michigan State and Indiana. The compact asked for leaders at the universities to put together a defense fund that would provide for legal and other financial resources to support the school should it be attacked by the administration.
Danielle Blynn now joins us at the desk. Good evening, Danielle. So when you're thinking of a school like Harvard University, an Ivy League with billions of dollars, and they have this opportunity to sue and create a lawsuit mainly because of its status and, again, their money. But what is the difference between Harvard organizing their own lawsuit individually versus this defense compact that you mentioned with other fellow Big Ten schools?
Yeah, so I think you kind of hit it on the head. The Big Ten schools are doing this, and they're creating this fund because they don't have the ability to sue the Trump administration by themselves. They need the help of these other schools. A lot of the Big Ten schools that have signed on to this, Michigan State, Nebraska, Indiana, those are all state schools. They don't have the same kind of tax-exempt status that Harvard does. Obviously, Harvard getting threatened to lose it. But Harvard they are the wealthiest school in the country. They have a lot of money. I think it's $51 billion in their endowment. They have the ability to fight this lawsuit and fight with a lawsuit, but the Big Ten schools, they just don't have that kind of backing behind them. So that's why they've made this fund.
Danielle, you mentioned that tax-exempt status. We were talking a little bit before the show about how Syracuse is a tax-exempt institution. I mean, 51% of property in the city of Syracuse, no property taxes paid on that. SU playing a huge role in that, owning millions of dollars in new acquisition just on Marshall Street. What are kind of those informal ways and tools that the Trump administration is using, whether that's the IRS going after tax-exempt statuses or cutting NIH funding? What are kind of those informal tools that the Trump administration is using against these universities to kind of push this anti-woke policy?
Yeah, we've talked before on the show about the NIH funding going away and they're really pushing on these grants to research, which if you're looking at DEI policies, a lot of it isn't even geared towards research funding, but that's kind of what they're pushing for. And then like you mentioned, the IRS is the other big one. They're also looking, I know the Harvard lawsuit is against HHS, also Homeland Security, I think is a part of that. So that's kind of where they're looking at it. They're saying it's all based on anti-Semitism and trying to stop anti-Semitism, but they're cutting funding from research that goes towards cancer research and other kind of malaria research, things like that in terms of infectious diseases. So they're not necessarily getting rid of DEI policies, they're cutting research funding mostly.
Yeah, and this lawsuit kind of claims, it came out and they're saying, Harvard's saying, hey, you're cutting research funding, but you're claiming anti-Semitism, and they're struggling to kind of see that gap between those two. How is the Trump administration justifying that? Are they justifying that?
I don't think they are. I mean, the lawsuit obviously just came out earlier today, so I don't know if they've had the full time to respond, but Harvard is saying it's a First Amendment violation. They're arguing that this lawsuit has nothing to do with anti-Semitism, the funding that's getting cut. The Trump administration hasn't said anything, but this is not the only school they're attacking on the grounds of saying it's against anti-Semitism. The same thing was happening at Columbia. That's why they're losing their funding. The difference is Columbia just obviously kind of conceded and said, okay, fine, we'll go with what you're saying. But this is the first lawsuit that they're kind of having to face the idea that, like, yes, we're saying it's anti-Semitism, but they haven't actually showed why.
For sure. Thanks so much, Danielle. We'll continue to follow that, and especially what that means here at Syracuse University. Well, coming up on Talking Points, Trump lowers flags to half-mast around the nation following the Pope's death this morning. We'll break down what his passing means for Catholics here in the United States. Stay with us.
women are bad with money.
It's what the world's been saying for centuries.
But now, we've got something to say.
Save it. Save the old-fashioned advice, the empty excuses. It's all worthless, unlike us.
To our fellow females, it is time to save ourselves by saving our money.
Contributing to our futures, investing in our independence.
Until we're no longer 80%
more likely than men to live in poverty in retirement.
So again, we say to that, save it.
The falsehoods, the feelings of fault, then the funds.
Learn how to save for your retirement at wesaysaveit.org.
Welcome back to Talking Points. Well, Pope Francis died this morning at the age of 88, just one day after his final appearance on Easter Sunday. The Vatican says the pontiff suffered a stroke that put him into a coma and led to heart failure.
Cardinals from around the world will gather in the Sistine Chapel in a process known as the Conclave. So, Ben, with this untimely passing, I definitely think that there will be a religious decline, which could lead to, fewer stable networks and a dependence, especially on online radicalization. Also noting how the decline in institutional religion will also change how Republicans especially mobilize rural voters less through churches, but more so media and cultural grievances. How do you believe that the Pope's death is affecting all this?
I mean, we talk about a religious decline, and we're seeing it in real time. I mean, 20% down over the past 4 years in Catholicism. For every 8 people that leave the church, only 1 is entering. That's not like a party you want to be at, right? You don't want 8 people leaving for every 1 coming in. I mean, the faith is facing a real struggle right now. And Republicans who leaned so much on Catholicism as a crutch in this past election when it came to issues like abortion, when it came to issues like gay marriage, they no longer have that crutch, especially if that Catholic base isn't there. So they're going to have to kind of pivot that message.
And I definitely think that, you speaking to the 2024 election, during that time, Vice President Vance, he was really out, especially to these rural Catholic communities, sending signals of recognition, but also respect for the overall, not only just religion, but more so Catholicism, and how the church really holds a symbolic value, especially within this country. And I really think that supporters at the time appreciated that, especially those who are mourning the Pope's death today.
For sure. I mean, we look at the Pope, and something that's kind of been said across papacies over the past couple of years is it's this pendulum shift. We saw Pope Francis, who was a much more progressive Pope when it came to gay marriage, when it came to immigration, even speaking out against Trump at times when it had conversations with the border wall. And so now you're seeing some say, hey, the pendulum's going to go right back to conservative Pope. We're going to see out of those 5 front runners that are coming forward, only 1 is kind of that traditional de facto leader of that conservative branch of Catholicism. That's Cardinal Raymond Burke. He's not the front runner. So the odds that there's a progressive Pope coming into office here in the papacy is pretty high.
Definitely. And, in this day and age, it's going to be really interesting to see how that plays out. Again, I think that, the Pope's death, it's seen as a metaphor for wanting an opportunity to really just change the agenda, especially of, right-wing American politics. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens from this day on.
Yeah, and it's interesting to see how conservatives are approaching this. We saw Trump go on X this morning saying God bless about the loss. But then we saw Marjorie Taylor Greene go on X and say that, quote, evil is being defeated at the hand of God. So you really are, like you said earlier, Andy, this radicalization online and conservatives, and you're seeing this very big schism in how they're approaching that.
Definitely.
Well, that's all the time we have for you on this episode of Talking Points. Be sure to follow us on Twitter and Instagram at CitrusTV News and like us on Facebook. I'm Ben Bascuk.
And I'm Andrea-Rose Oates. Have a great night, Syracuse. We'll see you next semester.